and the transcript. And people should be filling in. As you're joining, welcome. I'm just going to go ahead and drop the agenda in the chat periodically as people continue to join to watch our meeting.
All right. Thank you, everyone, and welcome for the folks attending the webinar. Sorry, we're starting a little late, but super excited about the conversation today. We're going to be talking about the climate action plan that the city just released. The goal of this meeting is for the EJCGC to be able to draft a list of questions that we can send to the city that they will come back and present on in our August meeting. So, and is my network spotty? Can you guys, am I okay?
We can hear you. You're a little bit laggy sometimes on the video.
Okay. So the goal is to be able to create a list of questions and just raise any concerns or maybe even places of praise that we have in the climate action and adaptation plan for the city to present for our August meeting. Folks in the audience are more than welcome to use the Q&A feature or the chat to also uplift questions that you may have. But we spent the first third, we just went over the cap and did a high overview. We have two presenters today who are going to be speaking on some of the work that and advocacy they've been doing around the climate action plan, and just hope we have a good, thought-provoking, lots of conversation about the future of our city. Perfect, Moise, you're dropping links in chats. So first group or folks that I'm going to invite to present are Goalie and Doug, who are with the Sacramento Climate Coalition and also 350 Sacramento. And we'll be talking a little bit about how we finance the cap. And well, I'll let you guys present. Go ahead.
All right, thanks, Nalia. Well, we're going to share our screen, Moise. Unless you want to put the PowerPoint up for us.
You are now a co-host, so you should be able to.
Okay. Okay, we're going to be brief, so you guys will have adequate time. And go ahead and do the
Moise, can you see
slideshow.
everything okay?
Why don't you do the slideshow then?
Yeah, I think if you go to the present view, it should go full screen, but we can see.
Let's play from start. Okay, sorry. All right. Thank you so much for asking us to come to this event. We've been doing some research about what are possible mechanisms for Sacramento to fund its climate action, as we saw this year that pretty much the mayor and the city didn't have very much put on the budget. And next slide. This is just an overview. Doug is gonna talk this first part.
Yeah, just an overview. Some of you may be familiar with different mechanisms for funding things like climate change. We thought we'd do a couple of them, but the one we really want to spend some time on is creating a public bank here in Sacramento, which would be novel, a novel way of funding. We know the cap doesn't necessarily address funding, but in order to do the things in the cap, the city has to have the money available to do that. And so these are ideas for them to think about in terms of how they're going to fund the work that they need to do to get to 2030 carbon-free by 2030, which is in their climate emergency declaration. First is just few things here. Business license surcharges is a way of doing it, getting money for this type of work. You can do voter-approved fees on electrical or utility usage. There's a number of cities out there that are currently doing that. You could pass a climate bond with voters to generate money to do climate change work. And you could also create a public bank, which we're going to focus on. There are other possibilities out there, and I'm sure not many of you can think of them, but these are the kind of the top ones that we had in mind. In terms of a business surcharge, one of the, and we'll make these slides available so you can read them in detail, but again, we wanted to spend time on the public bank. But Portland, Oregon does have a clean energy fund that they raise money by putting a 1% business surcharge on large businesses. That raises $54 to $71 million annually. So that can be a big source of revenue if you can get something like that going. You can do fees on electrical usage. Athens and Ohio, they're funding their carbon-free work based on an electrical usage fee. This is another one that we could do. A lot of times this needs to be voter approved as well. Boulder, Colorado also has a tax. They put on not only electrical usage, but other utility usages, which in that work that the money they're generating there, 1.8 million a year for this city is being used for climate work. But I'll turn it back over to my wife, Goli Saba. She's going to talk about public bank and what is a public bank and how we might have one in Sacramento.
All right, so what's a public bank? In the US, most public money is held in private banks. Sacramento partially utilizes Chase. I haven't figured out where they put the rest of their money. These private banks represent some of the largest fossil fuel investors worldwide. In fact, Chase is the largest fossil fuel funder. And so a public bank is basically a financial institution that's owned by public entities. It could be a city, county, region that leverages its equity for public good by lending and investing in areas such as affordable housing, green infrastructure, and anything that community decides on. Doug's going to do this one. Okay, and so this kind of gives a pictorial image of what the banking system would look like in a private bank, which is what we have now. Often they will fund fossil fuels, gun manufacturing, private prisons, and the stock market. A public bank would pick priorities that community wishes, and often it has to do with green economy, community action, helping local businesses, and affordable housing. In fact, this is one of the reasons that the San Francisco Public Bank the organization decided to have a public bank so that they could get basically divest from fossil fuels and such things.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in. I think the important distinction here is that a private bank reports to its shareholders, and its fiducial duty is to return as much money as it can to the shareholder, which means that they're going to invest in all these things that may not be good for the community that we've got listed here. A public bank answers to the community where it is, and so it has the ability to take its money and invest it in things that the community needs and things that are going to be good for the community. Big distinction.
So this is not a new idea. In the US, Bank of North Dakota has been operating for 100 years. 25% of the banks worldwide are actually publicly owned. The top photo where it says Sparkasse, that's the German public banking system. They have over 400 banks, which have been primarily what's led to Germany having such a great green energy program. And then in California, lots of different cities, San Francisco, LA, Santa Rosa, East Bay, and we'll show it, are actually working on this already. So it's been approved by, let's see, go on to the next one. So how much money are we talking about? This is from the website of LA's public bank website. It says last year the city of LA paid $170 million in banking fees and $1.1 billion in interest to big banks and investors. This money doesn't have to go to Wall Street. So it's a huge amount. Of course, they're bigger, and their bank kind of put together about 10, a coalition of 10 different cities that are working on this. Okay.
But it gives you an idea of the amount of money
Yeah.
that can be used to be reinvested back into the community and not go out for private investment.
The Bank of North Dakota has been successful for over 100 years. It actually, it's in its charter that it will not compete with local banks, and it actually is supposed to help them. And that's the way it's been. They have, 2 studies have shown higher return on investment than the Wall Street banks. And there's fewer economic losses and faster recovery, both in 2008 and 2020. It showed that they actually do better.
And those who can remember the 2008 recession where banks were going out of business and going defunct, North Dakota, its public bank had no problem weathering the storm because of the sound investments that it was doing in its community.
Right. They were not greedy. So some of the benefits of the public bank are that it would invest public money back into our community, return investment profits to local governments. It would provide better loans to underfinance small businesses. It reduced the cost of servicing local government debts. By refinancing municipal bonds at lower interest rates. So this is actually huge. Gail McLaughlin, who was the mayor of Richmond, she helped us with this presentation, and she actually talked about how they could basically, just by refinancing, just like we refinance houses, you can refinance government debt and you can get a huge amount of money just out of nowhere that would otherwise be going to Wall Street. Also allows local governments to directly access federal emergency funds and increase resilience, prosperity, and innovation. As far as the other things that the public banks can help us solve, there's a lot of issues, like, for example, in Oakland, they talk about how there was a huge disparity in terms of BIPOC-owned businesses getting adequate lending for businesses and for homes, high fees and interest to Wall Street banks for managing their funds and investing them in harmful industries. We talked about that. Let's see, in Oakland, they paid $63 million on its long-term debt, which is 6% of the budget in 2020. So that's a huge amount of money that we could otherwise use, something like that. A lack of funding for cities and counties. We all know about that, and this can really help. And in terms of, I think we'll go on to the next one.
I think the important point on this slide is not only can you use this money to fund carbon-free work that's going to make our city resilient and carbon-free, but you can also use it to invest in other priorities. These kind of disparities we see here, as well as the unhoused here in Sacramento. We have a major problem with the unhoused.
Affordable housing.
And affordable housing. All these monies that we take back from Wall Street by having a public bank could be used for these kind of needs in the community.
And actually, California is the first state, besides North Dakota, that approved the Governor Newsom signed into law Bill AB 857, which was passed and created the legal pathway for public banks. So it's totally legal, and currently there's at least 10 cities that are working on this, and there are multiple other states have now passed a law that similar to the one we have, and 16 cities across the US and a lot of states are actually working on this. And these are some other innovative ideas. I'm not sure how much time we have, and these you guys can look at it later if you like. I think the one that I wanted to mention, I think we'll pass on that. You guys can look at it later.
Yeah, we want to leave time for questions. So anybody have any questions, or Moise, if there's any questions in the chat, maybe you can read them for us because we can't see the chat.
Yeah, sure. I think Janice had a question, and then
Yeah.
Maria.
I'll start with my question. So going back to like the public banking, how would this affect inflation? Because we already, with the pandemic, that was like more like a great hit when it comes to the economical system of like how our world functions. So how will this affect inflation? Because that is something that in the long run is really going to affect our country. So is this something that will more so benefit that, or would this be something that's kind of negative to that spectrum?
That's a great question. I'm not sure if we would have the exact answer for it. And if we do have higher inflation, which affects small businesses here in the community, and those small businesses are, they need some help, a public bank could give assistance to small businesses that would be affected by the inflation. If inflation caused interest rates on loans to go very, very high, a public bank could keep its interest rates lower for lending money to the businesses here in the community, which would make the borrowing of money for our local businesses more affordable and more probable. Hopefully that helps a little bit. Other questions?
Hi, go ahead, Nick.
Oh, thank you, Moise.
The question for, thank you for the presentation. The idea that we would, some of the financing options presented in the cap, is the idea that we would exercise all the above sort of financing, or revenue generating options and then deposit that into the public bank. Is that sort of the overarching proposal?
Yeah, I mean, if basically once we get this running, the city will be able to save money by not putting their money into Wall Street. So and since public banks have been shown, you Gail, again from Richmond, she talked about how it can cut the cost of infrastructure and green energy, whatever, by 50% because they can charge a lower rate of interest than what private banks do.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's going to be a little bit of all of the above. In order to make Sacramento carbon free by 2030, there's going to have to be a major investment in the community. And there's different timing mechanisms in terms of when you can get the money. So a public bank, we're not sure, but there's a lot of money there that can be get on a long-term basis. That would be money that would be coming back into the community, but that might not be available for 3 or 4 years as you get the public bank set up. The Sacramento budget, the city budget, you can get money out of that on an annual basis. So you ought to be going out, in order to fund the cap, they need to be going after the Sacramento budget and figure out a way to get money out of the budget and spend it on, the emergency versus other things that are in the budget. And then in terms of taxes and bonds, they may play a part as well because it's going to take a lot of money. But I think all of those are going to have to be addressed. The city's going to have to put together a task force that's going to specifically deal with how are we going to fund this work that we have to do. And we believe from the Climate Coalition, it's really important that the Sacramento County as well as SMUD declare climate emergencies, and they're currently collaborating. So we believe that they need to work together to really put together a financial plan that's going to fund this really important work. Thanks for the question.
Can I add something to that real quick?
We only have a few more minutes for this part of the presentation, and we have 2 people who had questions.
Okay.
Emilio, you had your hand up, and then Janice will go to you next.
Yeah, I guess I'm thinking along with Nick, kind of if you've thought through other specific like local revenue sources that may be smaller but are perhaps more reliable, and specifically thinking about property tax and the kind of limitations that we have at the state and what sorts of things you might think can be done in light of our property tax limitations to help fund climate action.
Yeah, I think we in the beginning of the presentation we showed a number of tax options, and that may be a way of getting money quicker than some of the other options, although it may have to be voter approved, and so you have to get something on the ballot that people are going to vote for and then approve. But it certainly is an option. There's also bonds, like we talked about before. I mean, the most immediate source of funding, obviously, would be just taking it out of the city budget and getting the people that vote on the city budget, the council members, to, deem that this is important work and then, spend the money to make it happen. But I think it's all those things we listed in the beginning, as well as the public bank, are options. I think the novelty of the public bank is that you're not asking the public to pay more in terms of taxes. You're actually taking that money that's already we're spending, all that money that's going to Wall Street in terms of interest on our bonds and bank fees comes back to the community. So it's fairly novel, although we may not be able to execute that as quickly as we need to, but we want to certainly get that going. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you so much, and thanks for the presentation.
Thank you. Great question. Thanks. And one more, I think, from Janice.
Yes, I appreciated the presentation as well. But one of my main questions, because I think I'm like the youngest person here, I just turned 16. So how do you guys plan to keep like the youth involved when it comes to things like this? Because you can get this infrastructure, but if today's youth, we're tomorrow's future. So if we're not involved about what you guys plan to do and how it won't sustain, because we're not going to feed into it because we have no knowledge of it. So during this whole process of trying to get this in into fruition, how do you plan to keep the youth involved and having them aware and like knowledgeable, because eventually we're all going to be 18 and then 21, we're eligible to vote, we're going to be able to go to banks. I mean, I have a bank account now, so it's just like, what is it that you guys will be doing, like the work within community building, so that youth think that, okay, well, this is something that's a part of life, this is something that we need to feed into, rather than this is just another bank that they done made and they want my mom and my tax dollars now.
No, that's a wonderful question, Janice. A couple of thoughts real quick, and I'll let Goldie answer too. Our coalition reaches out to youth groups, Fridays for Future, as well as other youth groups who are part of our coalition that we're going to be using and picking their brains and getting them on, they're on board on our team to try to make this happen in the city. The other thing, specifically the youth, if you have a public bank and you have that money available, you can use that money to make green jobs for young people that want to work in the green sector. And so you can make jobs available for people, even through young people, even through internships or new jobs that they can then go after and spend that money in the community with people working here in the community. And North Dakota, the North Dakota Bank, what they do is they use their some of their money to help people with student loans. So I'm sure you're aware of the huge student loan burden many people have. In North Dakota, they're using some of their public money to lessen the burden of these student loans on the people that live in their communities. Yeah. So that's another way that you can specifically help youth. Go ahead, Goldie.
No, that you said what I wanted to say, actually. Yeah, and LA, when they had to get a vote on this public bank, they went to over 100 different organizations. That's how many they were able to get to sign on to this. So we will be reaching out and connecting and explaining and taking input. So we'd
love to have you join our team. Yeah, please.
And give us input who we should reach out to.
I think that's all our time we had. Are we good?
Goldie and Doug, thank you so much for your presentation. I think we all, as we've been doing this for about 1.5 years, the city is always saying, we have to find funding, we have to find money to implement all of these things. And so I appreciate you guys bringing some innovative solutions to that. So thank you for your time. Kate, we're going to pass it to you. So we also kind of did this out of order because Goldie and Doug had to go. So Kate's just going to talk about more general about the CAP and some of the things that her organization has been advocating for. So
thank you very much. We're going to take off. Thank you so much. Keep up the great work.
Thanks, Goldie and Doug. So actually, just for a second to pivot off what Goldie and Doug were talking about, and I probably have to connect with you, Goldie and Doug, another opportunity that I think will present itself very soon. We've heard there is going to be a ballot initiative brought up at the July 19th meeting. So council would have to vote in a majority to put this on the ballot for a youth fund. Think about $50 million of cannabis revenue to go to youth projects. This is a spectacular opportunity to make sure some of that money goes to climate-focused youth projects. One would think, right? The future, our next generation, job creation, job development, green jobs. So we had a meeting with Mai Vang a few weeks ago, and she was really excited. She couldn't say very much about it because I think it's going to be her ballot measure. So I just wanted to say that when we're talking about funding, this looks like this may be a new opportunity, and it would make sense. It would be a shame if there was nothing climate focused in that to be spending money on. So there could be an opportunity soon to kind of talk about that or push for that. So super excited to keep you all in the loop because that's something we just heard about super recently. And I'll touch base with you, Doug and Goldie. So as an aside, but keep that in mind. So a little bit of background, I want to step back and paint a picture of going into this CAP before we got it released. So a little bit of the last 3 months of historical knowledge. So there were the budget hearings July, May and June that we were doing some advocacy for, to be like, please spend more money for climate action. Please get more staff. You guys you all wrote a letter in June asking for more staff, more funding for climate action. That's what we were proposing and advocating for at the meetings. And as maybe didn't get any new staff. City council, city manager said, no, that's great. I'm going to have some more contract work. We're going to have some more consultants come on board. So we're going to be able to push this CAP out. They gave themselves a very giant pat on the back of doing an excellent job. It's only a year and a half late, but they were going to get it out by July. We don't need new staff. We're going to focus on consultants. So that was a bummer, but we were excited to see that the cap was going to come out. Come July 1st, we see that instead of a full draft, it's a preliminary partial draft. It's missing a key section. It's missing chapter 7, the mitigation and adaptation. This is going to be the critically important section on vulnerability of our key neighborhoods. It's probably the most important for underserved neighborhoods and talking about adaptation in Sacramento, about what we're going to do. Right. So it has like the key electrification, some transportation. There's some recommendations on urban canopy, but it's missing an incredibly important section that wasn't stated when we were arguing for this. Right. They're going to have this cap release in July 1st. So that's disappointing. We're going to bring that up at the next council meeting about, it wasn't exactly what we were promised. So that adaptation section is going to be in the next draft, which is released in fall. And so we have 30 days about to review this preliminary draft. So I will say what we're doing at 350, and we've been contacting a lot of different orgs to get them involved to just do a pretty preliminary high level review of this cap. Like, we just want to make sure someone's eyes are on each section, and that, if there's any like massive problems, if there's anything that we're overlooking, like that we've given comments to the city, since we have such a short turnaround. And at this point, we see that it's really not a complete draft, and we're going to get a bigger one, a more complete one in fall. So literally I have a meeting tomorrow, and we're getting people to turn around some comments in the next 2 weeks about each of the kind of different sections, who's good at water, who knows a lot about active transportation, who are electrification folks. So I wouldn't say I'm coming into this with like a full knowledge of all the comments, or if there's like issues. I'm personally going to look at the waste section, because that's kind of my industry. I work in like organic waste, so I'm excited about that. But I want to say at first glance, it looks like many of these cap measures mirror the recommendations that were made in that Mayor's Commission on Climate Change. A lot of the very similar language, they're carrying that over. At first glance, that's what it looks like. What I did notice is that there's a pretty huge gap in the city's plan on their emissions reductions, right? They're supposed to get to 0 by 2045. They acknowledge that they have a ginormous gap, and that's not addressed in this document. And, we're going to address it in the next iteration. We would be remiss to, try to say what we're going to do in the next cap in 10 years. So it's just a kind of giant, like, well, we have to figure out what we're going to do to meet these other emissions reduction goals that's not addressed in the cap, or kind of considered. So, and I'd say something important to remember in reviewing this is that this cap is like a list of goals and benchmarks. It doesn't include the ways to speed it up. We're still waiting for that conversation with the city that's now been put off to August, where they're going to talk about expediting the timeline and what that would take. And of course, like I just mentioned, it doesn't talk about meeting that gap that the city addresses. So still a lot of holes, which we kind of knew about, but it continues to be a hole in this version. So after that specific section about the different measures, there is a lot of discussion about what individuals can do. If you've seen that, was like the ones where it's like compost in your backyard, try to bike to work, always all good things. But I'm, personally kind of interested in more like how I would love to hear more discussion about how the city could support those things, or maybe some more explicit discussion about how they're going to support those or get people to do those. It's the individual responsibility versus how are we going to incentivize. So kind of to tie this together, and some questions I think it's important for this group to ask, what I'm asking myself in review. Some of the questions are: does the cap incorporate feedback given by this group on transportation, electrification, other things you've talked about? Does the cap incorporate feedback or address the concerns that were given by the equity working group? So that on page like 50 to 53 of the cap, it talks about the equity working group that was put together to raise concerns about some of these early cap measures, probably at least a year ago, 2 years ago. And there's a great list of concerns, many which I think have also been raised in this group. And we've told our technical reviewers to please keep this in mind while you're reviewing each section. Like, are these concerns accounted for? Did they mention them? Are they taken into account? And then we have kind of the bigger goals. Are these goals even big enough? We still have huge gaps in like emissions reductions. And another one to fall on, is there enough staff to carry out all these measures? Something this group asked for and we've asked for, like, this is a lot of stuff to do and it's not even enough. Do they have enough staff to do it? Is there enough accountability in this document? Is there enough measures that's going to be tracking the city's progress well enough? How are they going to be held accountable? Again, we have a couple folks looking at that, but that's always a good, you know, accountability is an excellent function and measure, and making sure that they're doing enough of that, or enough, you know, letting the public know about their progress on meeting some of these goals. So while a cap is great, it's going to be really important for them to actually act on it. As you all know, you know, at this point, I think the city has basically done the new building electrification ordinance, and it started some funding and some studies for transportation. We're still kind of waiting for some cool stuff to happen. And, you know, as we review this report in its preliminary form, while it's great to have comments, we see some of these like major gaps. So, you know, we're excited to review this. I can keep in contact with this group and let you know when some of those technical reviewers get back our comments. We're going to have that by like July 24th is our goal. So if you have an August letter, we're like happy to share all that feedback. Also would welcome any feedback from folks in this group on specific components. You know, as I said, it's a huge, our guiding principle and having people review is like checking the comments from this group and concerns, as well as the comments listed in the CAP from the equity working group and all the things. But it never hurts to have more eyes, making sure the city is on the right track and hasn't overlooked things. So I'd say the last thing I'd say is, again, what Goalie and Doug were saying, funding is a ginormous gap. I think this youth fund could be an excellent vehicle. That's something we're going to keep pushing on to make sure that there's a huge climate change component to some of that funding, if it becomes a real thing and it passes and it gets on a ballot, because having a youth fund without anything about climate change, I guess I'm not considered a youth anymore. I'm 31, but I still feel, you know, like it would be a sad thing to have to pass up. So we need to make sure it's implemented. We need to keep pushing them to go faster. And that's going to be a lot of bulk of our comments, as well as some high level stuff. So I did a lot of meandering in that. Hopefully that's helpful, but I'm happy to answer any questions. Yeah.
No, and I definitely appreciate a lot of the questions that you posed for us to be thinking about. So we have about 20 minutes left, and I'm hoping, again, the goal of this meeting is to create a list of questions that we can send to the city in advance of our August meeting that they'll come and answer. So the comment deadline for this draft cap is July 30th.
Mhm.
I don't think that will be, hey, no, thank you. Do you want to use this? I don't think that we'll be submitting comments for that time, but I do think that we can have the city give their presentation, and then we can create more robust comments for the second comment round. So what we're trying to do is just generate questions or areas of concern or things that we want the city to present on. So I want to open it up to folks. How are folks feeling about the presentations? What are folks thinking? I'm going to open it up to EC members first, and then we have some audience folks that I don't mind will allow to like maybe get you guys on video or allow you guys to talk and ask questions as well. But first, I want to give the space to the EJCGC members. Steve, Steve first, and then Janice.
Oh, thanks so much. Yeah, so supposing my question is more so one of strategy, and so we may want to defer this if this is premature, but supposing they don't adopt our recommendations, which is not out of the realm of possibility, because if passed as prologue, as Kate so eloquently pointed out, you know, there have been recommendations offered, you know, and those have not been adopted, including the ones that we have made in the past. So I guess my question is, what happens next?
So there's like the traditional answers that I can give when we're advocating for something and it doesn't happen, which is like the voting, whatever, figure that out. We all know that. One other option is, depending on where the city lands We are able to get the Department of Justice involved. There's been other cities where their climate action plans and general plans, community members have referred to the Department of Justice. Can y'all hear me? My neighbor just started sawing right now. There's where the Department of Justice can get involved and make the city have structured guidelines. They've done it for about 10 other cities across the state. But I think that is a good question that I would like to reserve for a later time, because yeah, I don't want to take up too much bandwidth on that, but I think it's good to have on our radar. Janice, will do you, and then Nick next.
Okay, so I really enjoyed the presentation, but like a major thing for me is like actually having like set things in order, like more so I don't want to just hear like we're gonna be reaching out, because we hear that every meeting where we speak to people, we hear that a lot of people are supposed to be reaching out, but I'm talking like lists of specific organizations and then plans for community building and community communication, not just we're gonna be reaching out, but no, we plan to do this. Maybe at this park we're gonna have a day where we connect with the community. We're gonna be sending out emails. We have emails ready. We have people that we're gonna be contacting, not just we're gonna be reaching out to so-and-so and people that you're already correlated with. I'm talking about people you don't know, because the people that you're correlated with, they're not going to be around forever. So I'm talking about reaching out to people that you're unaware with, but also like planning with new people as well. So that was like my only take from it.
Okay, thank you, Janice. Sorry, I had to save my baby from a big old spider. That's a good point. I think we can definitely ask for more concrete like follow-up, like not just like what are the plans, but like who are the people, where are the spaces, who are like the brokers that are going to have some of these conversations, and we can definitely ask the city to present on that. I think another thing that we can probably ask them is around they're giving progress reports and they're doing a 5-year update, but there has to be more like is there a community evaluation that can happen at some point? Like what are we doing that's just beyond like creating a plan and then putting it on a shelf and hoping it gets implemented? Nick?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate all the presentation. That one of the things that I think we need to ask for, be more clear, to get more clarity on, are the city sort of more concrete. Some of what Janice was saying, but more concrete as to the things that we're gonna commit to and fund for things that are already experiencing. So the things that come to mind are the cap kind of does sort of lip service to our unhoused neighbors and those who are most vulnerable to extreme weather events. So it does a great job of describing extreme weather events, acknowledging them and their impact on our climate and our our neighbors. But it really does not have in great detail as to kind of the automatic triggers and commitments that we're going to have as a city to make sure that we're opening those cooling centers, making sure that we're getting folks in out of the rain, out of the cold. And that might be, Kate, what you said was missing from this up at the start, but I think we need to push on that because there's a lot of great science and a lot of great background on this. But the thing is, I don't think it properly in phase one properly identifies the things that we know we need to do basically all year round and how we're going to get that done and how that's not going to just rely on kind of bureaucratic decision making. Because if we can get that in this, then we have another document to point to and more recourse for making sure that we're actually taking action on the kind of on a daily, weekly basis. So that's the thing I see missing from this is we know the things we're already the actions and interventions we need to take already. And so we'd love to have a commitment in this and for that to be sort of idealized in this document. So we can put some questions in there. I'm happy to help draft those or at least make comments as to their commitment to that.
That's such a great point, Nick. For the Mayor's Commission on Climate Change, one of the things that we were able to fight for was to have like a year one implementation plan. Like even if this doesn't get passed, what are the things that we can move now? And I think that speaks to a lot of the points, even the financing point. Like what are the things that we can fund and do and shift today that we don't have to wait for a cap to be approved in this whole process? Any other thoughts that folks want to raise up before I open it up to other folks on the line? I would like to add in just a question about, or something to the effect of how realistic these plans are. And like how, especially I think about the mode shifting part, getting people to walk and bike and use transit. I think I have no plans in the next 10 years to change the way that I get to school and work. And I don't know if any of you guys do. So I'd love to hear like tangible ways the city plans on actually increasing walking and biking. I don't think it's enough to put a plane in my neighborhood. That's not going to actually get me to ride a bike or walk more. So I want to hear like what are tangible ways that they plan on making this mode shift happen. We have Steve, and then Janice.
Most definitely, Naila. Yeah, I think we need to see a lot more on the implementation side as it relates to specific goals and measures and metrics and milestones, all of the above, to illustrate. And it will take a bit more than just simply placing added infrastructure. It's going to require a whole kind of paradigm shift to get people to these alternative, more climate friendly and better for you modes of transportation. And I guess my last comment, sorry to go on so long, is I guess I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge, and not sure if we have any capacity to tackle this, but what I think is the kind of the 600-pound gorilla, or elephant in the room, which is this initiative. I think it's also a ballot initiative concerning that Elk Grove to Folsom freeway expansion, and kind of like what the implications are for climate and planning, and urban sprawl in particular. And so I'm wondering if there is capacity to tackle that in this context, or or whether another venue would be more productive. But I think ultimately that has the potential to negate a substantial portion of kind of like the emissions reductions that are being planned. So I think we should oppose that.
Steve, I definitely think we should ask. I just imagine they're going to say it's out of the scope of this, and there's a lot up in the air with that. But I think that's a huge, huge thing on the horizon. I'm also, so climate plan, we're actually doing a webinar. Let's just drop the link in the chat if we can, Moise, about the ballot measure. And also San Diego did efforts to put, San Diego did a ballot measure to have a tax to fund some of their climate and transportation stuff, and it didn't make it on the ballot. And we're right now in the similar process. And so we're doing a webinar on ballot measures if folks want to attend. So we'll just, that's in the chat. But I think that's a great question to ask. I just don't imagine we'll get any response, but we should ask it. Janice?
I think it's really important that we're realistic, like what you said. Because, for example, we can start with how bikes are very expensive. Like getting an actual good bike is very expensive. And the society that we live in now, with prices and everything going up except for wages, like some people don't have it in their budget to go out and buy them a bike for them and their family so that they can be more fuel efficient and economy efficient. And then let's not talk about the other apps of transit like Uber, Lyft, Uber Eats. You can't bring somebody home and lift somebody from somewhere on a bike. I mean, you could try, but like, let's be realistic. I mean, it has like Uber and things like that, and Lyft have also been very helpful when it comes to safety. Like people who get drunk at a club, there are some people who don't drive, they're gonna call Uber or Lyft. Are you gonna pick somebody up with a bike? I think we should be very realistic. I mean, trying to encourage like getting hybrid cars and electrical vehicles is something that should be a little bit more incited on, rather than just no bikes, no fuel, no gas, none of that in that nature. Because if we're being honest, a lot of people, nobody's really going to do that. Like some people may, but it's not something that we could practically say that people are going to be encouraged to do. Especially looking at me and the people I'm surrounded by, it's something that helps keep a lot of people safe. And people who don't go outside, people with COVID, they're not going outside. They're doing groceries to their door, groceries to their car. You can't bike groceries, especially looking at what I get from Sam's Club. You can't bike that to someone's house. Like, I think we should be very realistic. And I think that's something that they don't really consider, that wasn't really considered when it came to like these new plans that are thought of. So I think that's something that should be taken into consideration.
Janice, 1000%. I think we need way more honest conversations, especially it's not just the city, it's in the environmental field about where people are today, and what we need to reduce emissions. And so I think 100% we have to talk about all the options on the table, and we can't just force communities to have a one size fits all. I thank you so much for your comment. I'm going to go to Moise, and then we're going to open it up to everyone.
Yeah, I just wanted to raise, and I'm seeing that no one else has anything raised. But what Megan had put in the chat, and Megan, feel free to, do you want to just
Oh,
read out?
we're gonna let Megan say it out.
Yeah.
Okay. Megan, perfect.
Well, I haven't finished reading the cap, but everywhere I look when I read it, there are no specifics, actions, programs, monies being allocated to any way to deal with climate change. There's a lot of nice talk about stuff we all already know about climate, but it really doesn't, what they've put out so far really isn't very helpful in making any change in the city that's going to take care of problems. The city's going to grow almost double by 2030, and each one of those people are going to have a climate footprint of some kind, and we want it to be less rather than more, if we're going to do something about climate change. And I'm a little distressed that there's really nothing obvious that's going to be done. It sounds like they're depending on a lot of other organizations to do the work for them, like SMUD or the Tree Foundation. But is the Tree Foundation going to plant the trees where they need to be planted? And some of it might be on public land. Is the public going to be, is the city, the public city, going to take care of that kind of situation? They've indicated no, that they don't have money for that. So
I think those are two great points. Oh, sorry, Megan.
That's fine. I get long-winded.
No worries. There's two great points I think that we can definitely add to our list, which is one, how like being reliant on partnerships, not being too over reliant on partnerships, and figuring out like what does the city actually have control over. And I would even split that, even like SMUD is one thing because they're a public agency, also doing a lot of dependence on nonprofits. So are you going to fund these nonprofits? Are you going to, what type of partnerships are you going to have to ensure that we're not passing the burden onto nonprofits? Your first point was population growth. Fun fact, San Diego has the Navy. The Navy is projected to increase their population by 10,000 new active duty military folks. Those military folks will bring family. San Diego did not include those 10,000 people in their plan because they're the military. Not that these people will drive on the streets. So I think we do need to push the city to think about population growth and how we're planning for people coming into the city, because we can project some of those numbers, and like Megan, exactly how you put it, each person carries a carbon footprint. Kate?
Sure, yeah, I mean, kind of, and off of.
Kate, you're muted.
Oh, now I'm just talking to myself. Okay, kind of spiffing off what Megan just said about funding too, and I put this comment in the chat if you want to read it. The total cost of implementing this is going to be over $3 billion. The city does not identify sources of funding. It looks at about 4 of their high cost priorities, says that's going to cost about $616 says, here are some ways we could fund it. So basically this cap has no feasible funding strategy. It's a very pretty, some of us would say not pretty document with no way to implement it, no funding mechanism. So I'd say that's also worth a comment. You know, it's there, all these ideas and no funding. And just the one thing on what Steve was talking about, right? That transportation measures on the ballot in November, and this mayor of Sacramento supports it. And I know there is like an informal coalition working on that, but I just wanted to reference that. But yeah, the funding thing is a huge worthwhile thing to comment on. It's just plans without any set, even like exactly what they're going to do. So yeah.
Thank you. So I promised I would drop the free kitchen compost link in the chat. So there it is. I think we started to compile questions today. What I want to do is open this up to folks. So EJCGC members and audience members, and I think the just larger community, if you send us questions in the next 2 weeks, those are things that we can pass on to the city. Why I think this is a good opportunity is because the city will be doing outreach to organizations, but this is an opportunity to like really hold their feet to the fire, tailor some of their comments to, you know, our concerns. And so let's use this opportunity to ask tougher questions around the cap. So we will like leave it open for 2 weeks probably before we send questions over to the city. We want to make sure they have enough time to get the right people in the room for the presentation and get the facts to us. So 2 weeks. Any final comments before we sign off?
I think I will just add a quick look at the cap. Maybe it's helpful to just have this portion of it open. The cap emissions reductions targets are specifically, and I can zoom in here. Sorry, this is, I know, really hard to look at. It's specifically per capita. And I noted that they included this language here on a per capita approach, allowing the city to continue to grow while focusing on decarbonizing systems rather than limiting growth that could compromise new housing and job opportunities and potentially increase regional emissions. And so they're leaving that opportunity for regional emissions to increase as long as they're lowering the individual personal emissions is the approach that the city's taking with this cap. And that's based on the California Scoping Plan guidance.
What a note to close us on, Moise. All right. As always, I just really appreciate space. I appreciate you all coming and your comments. And I will talk to you guys all in a month. Our next meeting is, Moise, do you have the date quicker than me? No?
August 4th.
August 4th. So everyone, see you August 4th. Feel free to email me or Moise if you have other questions or thoughts or points of clarification. And August should be a really entertaining, fun meeting. All right, bye everyone.